He was the face of cool in Hollywood, sharp suits, dangerous charm, and a voice soaked in grit. But behind that tough guy mask, Michael Madsen was silently crumbling. And no one knew how deep the darkness went, until it was too late. For decades, Michael Madsen defined the image of the hardened outlaw in film. Whether it was Reservoir Dogs, Kill Bill, or Donnie Brasco, he brought a unique edge, part poetry, part rage, that made him unforgettable. But fans only saw the character. Few ever saw the quiet, broken man off camera. And he made sure of it. Born in Chicago in 1957, Michael grew up in a working-class family. His mother was a filmmaker, his father a firefighter. That contrast, between creativity and chaos, was something Michael carried with him all his life. Early in his career, he was told he'd never make it in Hollywood. That his voice was too rough, his look too intense. But that rejection only added fuel to his fire. He worked odd jobs, slept in his car, and at one point nearly gave up acting altogether. It wasn't until director Quentin Tarantino took a chance on him in Reservoir Dogs that everything changed. Mr. Blonde, that unforgettable villain with a twisted smile, became one of the most iconic roles in indie film history. But while his career exploded, his personal life began to quietly fracture. Michael struggled with alcoholism for years. He spoke about it rarely, and always with pain. "There's a demon inside me," he once said in an interview. "It feeds off my sadness, and it drinks when I do." Friends say he often disappeared for days. Some weekends, he'd vanish completely, resurfacing with bruises, hangovers, and bloodshot eyes, but never excuses. Still, he kept working. Over 300 acting credits. Dozens of TV appearances. Voiceovers, poetry, even photography. He was a storm of creativity. But storms, no matter how powerful, burn themselves out. And Michael's began burning from within. Still, he kept working. Over 300 acting credits. Dozens of TV appearances. Voiceovers, poetry, even photography. He was a storm of creativity. But storms, no matter how powerful, burn themselves out. And Michael's began burning from within. Behind every Hollywood appearance, there were whispers of emotional breakdowns, canceled interviews, or set tantrums. But Michael never wanted pity. He hid behind his fame, behind sunglasses, behind that deep voice that made people think he was always in control. But he wasn't. And in his final days, that truth became tragically clear. Michael Madsen wasn't just an actor, he was a father. And to those who knew him, that role mattered to him more than any film ever could. He had 5 sons, and often said that being a dad was the one thing he wanted to get right. But fatherhood, especially for a man battling inner demons, wasn't simple. Among his children, Hudson Madsen was the eldest. Michael was deeply proud of him. Hudson didn't chase the spotlight like his father. Instead, he joined the U.S. Army, served overseas, and settled into what seemed like a stable, purposeful life. Michael would sometimes post about Hudson, photos of him in uniform, graduation ceremonies, family outings. Those were rare glimpses of tenderness from a man who mostly kept his heart locked behind layers of irony and pain. But in January 2022, tragedy struck. Hudson died by suicide at just 26 years old. The news shattered Michael. It wasn't just the death of a son, it was the death of his anchor. In public, he issued a brief statement. In private, he spiraled. Friends said he stopped returning calls. He canceled appearances. And most painfully, he blamed himself. "I didn't see it coming," he reportedly said to a friend. "But maybe I wasn't looking hard enough." Michael was devastated. He tried to hold it together, for his other sons, for his fans, for his career, but something inside him broke that day and never fully healed. The silence that followed Hudson's death was louder than anything Michael had ever screamed on screen. He entered rehab not long after. He checked in quietly, hoping to find clarity or maybe just relief. But grief is not something you fix in 30 days. It lingers. It follows you home. And for Michael, it crept into everything: his work, his sleep, even his sense of self. He tried to keep creating. He wrote poems, haunting, reflective verses about pain, time, and the ghosts we carry. In one unpublished note, allegedly found in his notebook, he wrote, "I used to act for the camera. Now I act for the memory of my boy. Every line I speak, I'm hoping he hears me." Those who knew Michael say he never fully recovered from losing Hudson. How could he? A man already at war with himself now had one more wound, and it was fatal in its own quiet way. In interviews, he began to speak more about regret, about time wasted, and about how Hollywood had taken so much and given so little in return. But even in those rare moments of vulnerability, he'd still smile, still crack a joke, because that's who Michael Madsen was. A man who carried sorrow like a shadow but never let the world see him weep. Until his final days. To the outside world, Michael Madsen was the eternal outlaw, Hollywood's go-to tough guy. He wasn't just an actor, he was a symbol. A cinematic rebel. A man who brought gritty realism to every role, not through method acting, but because that roughness was already inside him. When Quentin Tarantino chose him as Mr. Blonde in Reservoir Dogs, the world finally saw what some directors already knew: Michael had a dangerous authenticity that couldn't be faked. The infamous ear-cutting scene became iconic, not just for its violence, but for Madsen's eerie calmness. He didn't just play a psychopath, he made you believe he was one. But that success came at a cost. Hollywood loved Michael, but not in the way it loved Brad Pitt or Leonardo DiCaprio. He was typecast, the villain, the hitman, the ex-con. Directors admired him. Fans adored him. But the system never gave him the mainstream glory he truly deserved. It haunted him. In interviews, Michael often laughed off the idea of missing out on the A-list. But deep down, he felt overlooked. He spoke once about turning down a role in Pulp Fiction, a role that could have launched him into superstardom. It went to John Travolta instead. "I don't regret it," he said, but the pain was in his eyes. Behind the sunglasses, behind the swagger, there was a man who wanted to be taken seriously, not just as an actor, but as a human being. He published poetry, raw and unfiltered. He displayed his photography, showing emotion through frozen moments. But the world never gave that side of him the spotlight. Hollywood kept calling, though. He kept working, sometimes in major films, sometimes in low-budget indies. He took roles he didn't love, in projects that didn't respect his talent, just to stay afloat. His financial struggles were real. Reports say he filed for bankruptcy at one point, struggling to keep his home. He'd been through divorces, failed investments, broken friendships. The glitz of Hollywood masked a very real, very hard life. And yet, he never quit. He was fiercely loyal to his friends, especially Tarantino. He remained active in film right up until the end. Even in his 60s, Michael was shooting, promoting, writing. He had nothing left to prove, yet still had so much to give. His final projects showed glimpses of a softer, wiser man. But most of them never reached wide audiences. Like much of his life, they were buried beneath bigger headlines and shinier stars. He once said in a radio interview, "I'm not in this for fame. I just want to tell stories. Even if no one listens." But people did listen. And in his death, the world is finally listening more closely. Because for all the chaos he brought to the screen, the real storm was inside him all along. In the final days of his life, Michael Madsen was quieter than usual. Friends who were used to his booming voice and offbeat humor noticed a stillness in him, a silence that felt heavy. He wasn't on set, he wasn't at festivals, and he wasn't promoting anything. Instead, he was reflecting. Some say he had been working on a personal memoir, something raw and brutally honest, filled with poetry, confessions, and letters never sent. Others say he was trying to reconnect with family, especially his younger sons, making phone calls late at night, whispering apologies, and trying to leave behind some kind of peace. But deep inside, Michael was tired. He had lived through more than most actors ever endure, battling addiction, grief, and being trapped in an industry that both loved and used him. And when he passed away on July 3, 2025, the world didn't just lose a Hollywood rebel, it lost a storyteller, a father, a man who lived on the edge of every emotion. His cause of death was reported as cardiac arrest. But for those who knew him, the real cause was more layered. It was the slow accumulation of pain, emotional and physical, that wore his heart down over decades. His death wasn't sudden. It was the final page of a long, tormented script. Tributes poured in almost immediately. Quentin Tarantino called him irreplaceable. Actors who worked alongside him described him as intense, soulful, and endlessly kind behind the scenes. Fans on social media shared clips from Reservoir Dogs, Kill Bill, and even his poetry, discovering new depth in his words now that he was gone. But perhaps the most touching tributes came not from Hollywood, but from regular people. People who had met Michael at small conventions, dive bars, book readings. They told stories of a man who took time to talk, to hug, to share advice with struggling artists. A man who, despite his own battles, lifted others. His sons, in a private message later shared publicly, said, "Our father was larger than life. Not just in movies, but in heart. He wasn't perfect. But he loved us fiercely. And we loved him through every chapter." Michael Madsen may never have been the headline name on a blockbuster. He may never have held an Oscar. But what he left behind was far more valuable: truth, grit, humanity. He showed the world that pain could be turned into art. That toughness could hide tremendous tenderness. And that sometimes, the most unforgettable heroes, are the ones hiding in plain sight. He didn't need a cape. Or a spotlight. He just needed a script and a cigarette. And in the silence he's left behind, we hear him louder than ever.